10 years later, this is what they got. Nothing. No new transit-oriented development. The planners went to the city council and said, we can't figure it out. We got all these great development opportunities, and Portland has the hottest housing market in the country, and our housing prices are skyrocketing, and they're not building in these areas. You look at the map, and all the areas along the light rail line are vacant. What's going on? Well, they did what planners always do when the market doesn't conform to their preconceived notions, and they decided to start subsidizing transit-oriented development. And basically, anytime you read about a successful transit-oriented development, whether it's in Dallas or Portland or anywhere, Denver, Google the name of the development and TIF, or tax increment financing, and it'll turn out it was subsidized. Portland designed its redevelopment districts, urban renewal districts is what we call them in Oregon, TIF districts, to follow every light rail line in the city. So they could use the money from TIF to subsidize transit-oriented developments. And when they built these transit-oriented developments, these mixed-use developments, high-density developments, this is the kind of thing they got. Except that's in the former East Germany. It was built in the Soviet era. Here's the one in Portland I meant to show you. The difference is that when the East Germans got their freedom, they all moved out into single-family homes. And the building I just showed you is scheduled to be torn down when I took that picture. Meanwhile, in Portland, they built this one, and they only provided 2/3 of a parking place per dwelling unit. So you see those cars parked there? You see that little red sign? It says, no parking, fire lane. They're parked illegally. But they figured they didn't need parking because it's right next to the light rail station. See those cars? See that red stripe? That's the sidewalk. They're all parked on the sidewalk. The managers of this development know that if they enforce the parking rules, people will move out. So they call it a transit-oriented development, but people standing outside and watch people go to work, there's a group called the Cascade Policy Institute, which is Oregon's free market think tank, and they've stood outside this development and other transit-oriented developments and seen how people get to work. And they find that it's about the same number ride transit as any other development. The fact that it's light rail or transit-oriented doesn't make any difference. Here's a mixed-use development, 4-story building. The 3 stories upstairs are apartments. The lower floor is supposed to be shops. I'm standing at the light rail station. Every single shop has an identical sign in the window because they didn't provide any parking for the retail. And there's not enough people living upstairs or driving into the light rail station. There's a big parking area, but it's exclusively for the park and ride light rail customers. There's no parking for the shops, so there's no shops there. Now, I don't want to say that light rail is bad for business. There are some businesses that thrive on Portland's max light rail line. They just aren't the kind of businesses you necessarily want to have in your neighborhood. In fact, the Portland Oregonian, has documented that every time you open a new light rail line, you have a gang war over who's going to get control of the drug traffic on that line. And the police know that every time a light rail station opens, there's going to be an increase in property crime. One suburban mayor says that 80% of property crime happens in the 6% of area that's within, in his city, that's within a quarter mile of a light rail station. Now, Portland published this little report called Development-Oriented Transit to document that the streetcar led to a lot more transit-oriented development, or a lot more development. They routed the streetcar through a bunch of tax increment finance districts. This particular district in the lower right-hand corner is called the Pearl District. Within 2 blocks of, well, this Pearl District was originally a railroad yard. They used tax increment finance money to tear out all the structures that were there that were obsolete, put in new infrastructure, put in streets, put in water, put in sewage, put in parks, and they said, look, we built the streetcar and we got a Whole Foods. What they don't say is the city paid for a parking garage for the Whole Foods. So, they claim they got 50 projects worth $1.3 billion, $26 million a project, but to get that, they spent several $100 million in subsidies, in tax increment financing and other subsidies. Now, for comparison, The streetcar goes into one district that did not have any tax increment finance subsidies, called Northwest Portland. It's about the same area of land, about the same number of city blocks as in the Pearl district. And in this particular district, they recorded 7 projects worth a total of $17 million. Remember, the average project in the other district was $26 million. $2.5 million a project. Here's one of the projects they counted. It was a private gym that opened and went bankrupt in 5 years. So the streetcar did not stimulate development. It was the tax increment finance subsidy. So that's another hidden cost. They build rail transit, then they're going to want to spend more tax money building and subsidizing development along the way. And here's a curious thing. They built the streetcar and they subsidized a lot of housing downtown, and guess what? The people who live in that downtown housing don't take the streetcar because it only goes 6 miles an hour. Instead, they walk or bicycle. And so what happened is the number of people commuting to downtown by transit has actually declined. The number of people walking or bicycling has gone way up. And most of that has come out of transit. And the people who bicycle don't like the transit because the grooves in the rails are very dangerous. All right. I don't know if you've heard about Portland much out here. In most of the West, everybody's looking to Portland. Oh, that's a hip city. There's even a television show called Portlandia about Portland. Watch it. They said, we try to imagine the most extreme situations we can, and 2 days later we find something that's even more extreme in Portland. So they can't even satirize it because reality is funnier than it really is. So why is Portland so hip? What's made it so attractive? Is it the streetcars? Is it the light rail? No. In a word, it's beer. Beer has made Portland hip. How did that happen? Well, first of all, the first microbrewery in the country opened in Portland in 1979. Then in 1985, the Oregon legislature passed a law legalizing the sale of beer on the same premises in which it was made. Within 4 years, they had a dozen brew pubs in Portland. Today, there's 55 microbrew pubs in the city of Portland, more than any other city in the country. There's at least 20 in the surrounding suburbs. And Oregon has more breweries than any other state in the country. Oregonians drink more microbrew or craft beer than any other state in the country. And every trendy neighborhood you hear about in Portland, Hawthorne, Northwest 23rd, whatever trendy neighborhoods you hear about, Fremont, Alberta, there's going to be a microbrew pub nearby. There's not necessarily going to be any rail. There's no rail near Hawthorne. There's no rail near Northwest 20. Well, there's one rail line that Northwest 23rd, but it was already trendy long before there was a rail line there. It's not the rails, it's the brew pubs. You can go lots of places where there's rails and there's no trendiness. For example, Portland has a chain of stores called Fred Meyer's. You've all got Meijer stores out here, spelled a little differently, but they're the same. They're both hypermarts. My Fred Meyer invented hypermarts. Your Fred Meyer, or Grand Rapids Fred Meyer, came and visited Portland's Fred Meyer and decided to import hypermarts to the Midwest. This Fred Meyer store is in what's called Rockwood, a suburb of Portland. You can see the light rail train right behind. This is the only Fred Meyer store in history that's ever closed for lack of business. So, if you're a hipster and you're living in Portland and you're going to call all your friends from Massachusetts or Indiana or wherever and say you should move to Portland, are you going to say, move to Portland because we got this great streetcar that's so slow that an Oregonian reporter found out he can walk faster than a streetcar? Or are you going to say, move to Portland because we can go to a different brew pub and eat every night and not have to repeat for 2.5 months? We can have a different locally crafted beer every night, and it'll take a year or two before we have to start over again. It's not the streetcars, it's the beer that made Portland hip. Well, if it's beer, then why do cities all over the country want to build streetcars and light rail transit? It's simple. In 1991, Congress created a big pot of money. It's called New Starts. And they said to cities, if you come up with the most expensive, wackiest transit proposals you can, you'll get the most amount of money. If you come up with cheap transit proposals, you probably won't get any money. So the incentive was to come up with expensive transit. And that's what cities have done. Indianapolis has so far resisted the temptation to get free federal money. But if you succumb, you'll be able to tap into this pot of money, but it's going to cost you a lot more in the long run. Well, what should you do instead? I think you can make some transit improvements that don't cost a lot of money. First of all, contract out your transit to private operators. Very little transit in Indianapolis is contracted out. The Colorado legislature passed a law that required Denver's transit agency to contract out half of its bus transit. And the half that it contracts out costs less than half as much per bus mile as the half that it operates itself. Now you ask, well, why doesn't it contract all of it out? Well, it's because of unions. Now, one of the contractors has a union, but the unions who are dealing with the public agencies have a lot more leverage because Congress has a law that says you can't get a grant from the federal government without union approval. So the unions for the transit agencies end up getting a lot of money. So contracting out is a way to save money if you can overcome the union resistance. I also think you should legalize private transit. Most American cities, it's against the law to run transit in competition with the public transit agency. There's one city that has only private transit buses. That's Atlantic City. They have private transit. It runs 24 hours a day. It's practically the only city in America with 24-hour-a-day transit. It's all private. It gets no subsidies. Fares are $1.75. If there's a fare at all, some of the buses don't even have fares because they're subsidized by the hotels. A lot of Sun Belt cities do not prohibit private transit. San Ysidro, California has 11 different companies providing private transit service. Atlanta, Georgia has this private transit company, several private transit companies, 5 or 6 of them, in direct competition with the public transit agency. Miami has at least a dozen private transit companies in competition with the public transit agency. So you can find private transit. All you have to do is legalize it, and it's going to happen. It's going to be there. Then, if you go to the San Francisco Bay Area, they have a regional rail district called BART. But they don't have a regional bus district. Every bus district is limited to the counties. So if you want cross-county bus service, you can't go to a regional bus district. And the trains are so expensive that they don't serve very many places. So employers like Google and Apple and Facebook are buying their own fleets of buses. Google just bought a whole bunch of double-decker buses because the single-decker buses they were operating didn't have enough capacity. And they're carrying people from San Francisco County through San Mateo County to Santa Clara County because that's where their people are going. Now there is a rail alternative, but the rail lines don't stop near their offices, so they provide buses. Portland has a regional transit district, both buses and rail, a regional transit district. But the state legislature allowed cities to opt out. And several cities have discovered that they can provide better transit for less money if they leave the regional transit district. So there's at least 4 different city-owned transit systems, most of which run buses from that city. This is Wilsonville, this is Sandy, this is Canby. They all run buses in their cities, plus buses to Portland in competition with TriMet, the regional transit district, and they save their taxpayers money because it costs less to provide better service than TriMet was charging them.